In this pod-slice summary of the Huberman Lab Podcast, Dr. Andrew Huberman and Chris Voss's conversation is guided by Voss's career as a leading crisis negotiator for the FBI and his expertise in negotiation. During his time in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Voss has honed his skills in managing challenging conversations and aiming for beneficial results. He elaborates on this by discussing the necessity of understanding not just another person's emotions, but also personal emotions for achieving accurate information processing and allowing for effective dialogue. One crucial technique Voss suggests entails understanding the real intent behind negotiations. He emphasizes the importance of recognizing when a deal isn't worth pursuing or when the other party may not be reliable. The focus here is shifting attention from trying to secure any deal to securing a viable and beneficial deal. The aim is to avoid wasting time and resources on a deal that might turn out to be inconsequential or detrimental. The conversation further explores the role of personal demeanor and approach during negotiations. Voss recounts an instance where his playful attitude provided a favorable result. He suggests that a positive or playful approach can lead to astonishing negotiation outcomes. It's not about the intensity of negotiation, but the astonishing, unexpected results it might yield. Regarding the various elements affecting negotiation, Voss notes the role of mood and emotions. He acknowledges that sometimes being calm might lead to better results. He suggests techniques to achieve a calm demeanor, one being using a calm, steady voice, which can have a dual effect, calming both the speaker and the listener. He also provides a scenario of feeling lucky to be in a negotiation where he knew he was being deceived, an indication of a great product the counterpart wished to attain. The discussion also touches on how various emotions affect thought processes. According to Voss, negative emotions can impede the capacity to process information, which informs his strategy to adopt a calm voice to tamp down these emotions. He draws a link between emotions and potential deal outcomes. Dr. Huberman further corroborates Voss's practice with neuroscience, explaining how low-frequency sounds can lead to lower frequencies in neuronal firing, thus contributing to a change in the emotional tone of the listener. This point offers neurological support to Voss's strategy of using a low, calm voice during intense negotiation phases. The podcast conversation continues building on the foundational ideas established earlier about negotiation. Chris Voss shares that the act of negotiation provokes an involuntary reaction and is not a matter of choice as such. Emphasizing the importance of tone and demeanor, Dr. Huberman discusses how a high-pitched, chipmunk-like voice might not be as effective as a low, calm voice during negotiations. This hints at the subconscious effects of auditory cues during communication. The podcast delves into the historical use of high-volume music and sounds as a tactical tool during warfare. Voss references instances during the Gulf War, the Panama Crisis, and the Waco Siege, where this technique was used, albeit unsuccessfully. He asserts that hostage negotiators were adamantly against using such tactics as they were counterproductive. Shifting the conversation's focus, they then tackle the dynamics of benevolent negotiations, those where there's a win-win situation or genuine mutual benefit. Open-ended negotiations that venture into exploring potentials rather than predefined outcomes serve as a different approach. However, Voss cautions against the misuse of the term win-win, stating it correlates with a person looking to take advantage of your trust. The podcast further explores the concept of feeling heard, wherein the aim is to understand the other person's point of view instead of insisting on one's own perspective. This method accelerates the conversation while simultaneously building rapport and gathering information. Andrew Huberman links this approach to hypothesis testing in science, using it as an interesting parallel to the negotiation process. Voss also advises caution when negotiating with people who use catchphrases like win-win early on in the conversation. He believes these individuals might have ulterior motives. However, in contrast, openers that establish a sense of generosity and a genuine willingness to offer value can create a strong rapport and trust. In the context of benevolent negotiations, understanding your counterpart's perspective, offering value up front, and frameworking negotiations as hypothesis testing can lead to more collaborative and successful outcomes. The combination of these principles leads to a nuanced understanding of negotiation dynamics, giving you the tools to navigate a variety of complex scenarios. The discourse takes an intriguing turn as Dr. Huberman and Chris Voss delve deeper into the dynamics of high-stakes, high-friction negotiations, where the potential of catastrophic consequences lies within every decision. Interesting anecdotes from Voss's experiences as an FBI negotiator are shared, which provide real-world examples of how intricate, tense, and high-stakes these scenarios can be. Voss recounts 2 hostage situations he negotiated while stationed in the Philippines. One was successfully resolved without loss of life, while the other tragically resulted in the death of hostages. Voss admits these sobering situations taught him vital lessons about both the negotiation process's challenges and the limitations of the negotiation team's intel and decision-making. He also discusses the importance of understanding the mindset of the person you're negotiating with as quickly as possible, using the hypothesis-generating method to discern their intentions and requirements. There are usually clear patterns of behavior indicating their seriousness based on timeframes, specifics, and established behaviors from past interactions. These insights give strong directions about how to negotiate. The conversation also introduces the real-world implications of these negotiation strategies in our digital lives, such as dealing with online hackers. Voss explains the importance of verifying the authenticity of the threats and whether these online criminals truly have the proposed leverage. He emphasizes the importance of making the other party feel that they are working for what they get. It's about making them feel they've achieved, ensuring a solid outcome where chances of being scammed again, or in negotiation lingo, being double-dipped, are minimized. Dr. Huberman summarizes the conversation by suggesting that any request that puts a heavy emphasis on urgency should be treated as a red flag, a potential scam. This insight could be useful not only in high-risk negotiations, but in day-to-day situations where one might get exploited. The conversation thereby reaffirms the broad relevance of these negotiation principles in different scenarios, from being an FBI hostage negotiator dealing with high-stakes crimes to an average person navigating the digital world. In light of the gripping discussion between Dr. Huberman and Chris Voss, the conversation circles back to the application of hostage negotiation strategies in different scenarios. The nuances of conversation control and power dynamics are emphasized when Voss shares an anecdote about someone impersonating a friend and attempting to scam him. He highlights the importance of cautious verification, using humor and confusion as tools to turn the tables on the perpetrator. Significantly, Voss's advice isn't confined to such high-pressure situations. He indicates its applicability in everyday exchanges, aiding in discernment and building strategic responses when dealing with potential threats, instances ranging from a scamming hacker to a litigation lawyer. The narrative then shifts to a more psychological aspect. Voss refers to deep thinking and slow thinking from Danny Kahneman's behavioral economics concept. He recommends using how and what questions to prompt deep, slow thought in the opponent. The focus lies less on the reply itself and more on the reaction. The thought process it stimulates in the adversary's mind can reveal the seriousness of their intent. In dealing with aggressive individuals, Voss suggests using a method he calls passive aggression, bombarding the opponent with questions until they tire out. He affirms that this approach effectively de-escalates combative scenarios and can potentially lead to constructive outcomes. Voss shares a phrase he often uses: vision drives decision. This means if a person indeed plans on cooperating, they would be able to describe what the implementation of their promise looks like. If they struggle to answer, it may suggest they never intended to comply, helping the negotiator understand the other party's true motives. He also details his experiences with high-stakes negotiations involving the LA guerrilla group FARC, implying how these principles are even employed in life-threatening circumstances. Dr. Huberman parallels this with lawsuits where probing for the intention can help parties comprehend if the opposite side is merely trying to intimidate or has a solid case. In their fascinating conversation, Dr. Huberman and Chris Voss explore the nuances of hostage negotiation strategies and correlate them with everyday interactions. In his discourse, Voss highlights the importance of cautious verification, the utilization of humor and confusion in managing potential threats, both in situations as serious as FARC hijackings or more mundane challenges like litigation lawyers. Voss also talks about Danny Kahneman's concepts of deep thinking and slow thinking, pointing out their significance in understanding the power dynamics in interactions. To dig more profound, he recommends using how and what questions to stimulate slow thought in the opponent, as the reaction to these questions tends to provide an insight into the adversary's intent more effectively than the actual answers. Tackling aggressive individuals, Voss suggests a method he calls passive aggression, constantly asking questions until the opponent wears down. This, he advocates, effectively de-escalates combative scenarios and can potentially yield constructive results. One of the critical takeaways from the conversation is Voss's statement, "Vision drives decision." He elucidates that if someone is genuinely inclined to cooperate, they can describe how they would implement their promise. If they find it challenging to answer, it often implies a lack of intent to comply. Our perception of a conversational opponent is often affected by unconscious cues. Voss asserts that our gut can distinguish between fear indicators and genuine intuition, thereby providing us with an intuitive window into the true intentions of others. Dr. Huberman and Voss both endorse the value in listening to these subconscious signals, a capacity that the field of neuroscience is indeed beginning to explore, with theories related to magnetoreception and similar phenomena. In face-to-face interactions, a negotiator must pick up on multiple cues, visual, tonal, and more. Voss warns against assigning definitive meanings to these cues without context or verification. In contrast, text negotiations are simpler, with one main point addressed at a time. Emphasizing alignment, Voss concludes that negotiators must ensure they have thoroughly absorbed all available information from a conversation, a process involving repetition and careful examination. Whether the subject is high-stakes hostage negotiation or an everyday disagreement, the interview underscores the profound importance of effective communicative strategies, establishing context, foregrounding honesty, and leveraging applied psychology towards successful outcomes. In this discussion, Chris Voss discusses the mechanics behind ending relationships, an understandably difficult task that needs careful navigation. Highlighting the human resilience to pain, he advocates quickly but gently delivering the bad news, akin to ripping off a Band-Aid instead of drawing out the process. Alongside, he introduces practical advice like not firing someone on a Friday, providing them with a better scope to deal with the situation. Also touched upon is the compelling concept of ego depletion, grounded in the psychology behind decision fatigue. It derives from the understanding that defending one's position can be depleting. The conversation segues into the practical application of this concept in hostage negotiations. In contained situations, where the adversaries are surrounded, Voss's strategy was often about depleting the opposition's ego resilience until they gave in. Yet, he points out this method could potentially backfire in business negotiations, metaphorically uncontained situations, where people can recharge and potentially back away or deviate from the agreed terms. Lastly, Voss delves into the vitality of approaching conversations and negotiations playfully, asserting that relaxation enables a broader perspective. As a part of preparation for negotiation scenarios, he puts emphasis on the importance of maintaining physical fitness and cultivating tranquility, ensuring one is ever ready for when real life calls for negotiation skills. Dr. Andrew Huberman and Chris Voss discuss the importance of readiness in negotiations, no matter the stakes. Chris stresses the importance of constant small-stakes practice, such as engaging in thoughtful talks with people across his day, including Lyft drivers and grocery store clerks. This allows him to keep his negotiation skills sharp by interacting consciously with people in everyday life scenarios. By constantly practicing, he maintains an element of agility in responding to unexpected interactions or situations. In addition, Chris shares his techniques for dealing with difficult situations where he is tasked to temper someone's ill mood. Utilizing what he refers to as triggers, he explains how he tactfully shifts the conversational atmosphere by asking unexpectedly positive questions like, "What do you love about driving for Lyft?" This technique has proven to be very effective for eliciting a more constructive, calmer response and generally shifting communication to a more positive terrain. Chris also delves into another aspect of communication, venting. He is not a supporter of unchecked venting, as he sees it as a potentially harmful spiral. He argues that what people are looking for when they vent is a sign that they have been heard and understood. To that end, he suggested providing feedback that addresses the emotions behind the venting, as opposed to correcting or advising the person venting. He suggests using those labels, phrases that start with seems like, sounds like, or looks like, to name the emotions that the person seems to be feeling. Physical and spiritual health also play a vital role in negotiations, Chris affirms. Maintaining a regular routine of prayers, performing a daily gratitude exercise, and maintaining good physical health through routines that include cold plunges and saunas can be incredibly beneficial to one's overall negotiation skills upkeep. Chris believes in the integration of all these elements, seeing the mind, body, and spirit as interconnected pieces that together aid in producing the best negotiation outcomes. For Chris Voss, the essence of a successful negotiation lies not just in the words exchanged, but the holistic readiness of oneself to engage dynamically in the negotiation process. In the continuation of the conversation, Chris Voss and Dr. Andrew Huberman delve into the concept of self-care and how it is often misinterpreted. They agree that self-care is not about narcissism or navel-gazing, but rather about taking care of oneself to show up better for others and to have more energy, capacity, and resilience. This concept also ties into their discussion on being run down both physically and mentally, and the impact this can have on an individual's performance in any job, including negotiation. In the discussion on the Federal Bureau of Investigation's FBI evolution over the years, Chris shares stories of some of the longest negotiations he had attended. He mentions one negotiation in Washington, D.C. during the start of the Second Iraq War, where a man claimed to have planted bombs around the city and held a tractor as a bomb. The individuals involved in this negotiation had to work long hours and rotate shifts. Chris emphasizes the importance of self-care in such situations, of taking time off to recharge and prevent burnout. Sleep, according to him, is easier when one puts faith in the process and feels that the best possible tactics are being employed. Besides self-care, he also sheds light on the importance of humanizing oneself in unsafe situations like hostage scenarios. Provide your name, show compliance. These strategies make it harder for harm to come your way. This discussion leads them to talk about empathy, where Chris distinguishes between empathy and compassion. Empathy is about the transmission of information, while compassion is the reaction to the transmission. He also highlights tactical empathy, which is about actively and verbally demonstrating an understanding of another person's perspective, thereby deactivating potential negatives. The subject of mirroring is then brought into the conversation. For Chris, mirroring is about repeating the last 1 to 3 words of what someone has just said. It isn't related to body language or tone, but instead speaks to the need for clarity or the craving for expansion on a point. The intention isn't to mimic, but to activate the speaker's thought processes and push them to rephrase themselves, providing more depth or nuance to the point. It's a communication tool that prompts people to give more detailed responses. They explore the neuroscience behind why hearing our own words spoken back triggers deeper thinking, acknowledging the need for more exploration of how brains interact. They discuss how hearing one's voice cancels out self-auditory perception, suggesting that mirroring might allow people to truly listen to their own words. The conversation then shifts to proactive listening. Traditional active listening techniques have been overused, and that has led to the loss of their essence, according to Chris. He suggests the need for proactive listening, understanding that negative emotions are predictable, and then actively working to diffuse them by addressing them up front. Rather than waiting for a negative response or misunderstanding, proactive listening means preparing the listener for the potential negatives. Chris points out that if a predictable negative isn't present, addressing it doesn't create it, but instead does a kind of emotional vaccination to inoculate future adverse responses. Dr. Huberman shares an anecdote from his grad school days when his advisor would preempt difficult requests with, "You're going to hate me." The acknowledgement of the issue beforehand always made the actual request more manageable. Interestingly, Chris points out this is a classic example of the proactive listening skills he recommends. They also broach the subject of negotiating with kidnappers and utilizing the kidnapper's family and friends to tap into different aspects of their psyche. The conversation fosters an understanding of how relationships and empathy could be used to gain a better understanding of the person and situation at hand. The discussion takes a deeper dive into the realm of hostage negotiation, where Dr. Huberman begins to explore the roles a kidnapper's social context could potentially play in influencing their actions. Debate circles around the paradox of individuals capable of committing horrific acts, yet displaying genuine love and care for someone or something in their lives, like their pets. Chris then delves into the differences between hostage takers in a contained situation versus kidnappers in an uncontained, unknown location. He shares an anecdote involving Dwight Watson, who famously took hostages using his tractor in 2002 in Washington, D.C. Interestingly, Watson's family members, containing long-standing emotional trauma and mutual wounds within their relationships, became an inadvertent part of the negotiation process, demonstrating the power of relationships and empathy in these tense situations. While tapping into a kidnapper's personal emotions through their loved ones can be impactful, Chris stipulates that it can also be a risky tactic, as the smallest misstep can actually exacerbate the situation by triggering old wounds and unspoken pains within family dynamics. He underscores the essentiality of a surgical shot when handling such situations. Careful orchestration, selective phraseology, and a gentle approach to avoid deep-seated familial resentments that can hinder the negotiation process. Carrying on, Dr. Huberman prods Chris on how he maintains his mental health given the highly stressful nature of his job. Chris attributes his resilience predominantly to the supportive and caring community he surrounded himself with, consisting of colleagues and friends who indulged in humor and understanding. He also labels emotional honesty, hard work, and occasional bourbon as key contributors to his mental health upkeep. Chris currently focuses on Fireside, a novel social media platform that facilitates interactive podcast sessions, essentially offering group coaching. Members subscribe to this service, log in for an hour-long session, ask questions, and interact with coaches. By combining the benefits of several social media platforms, Fireside provides real-time feedback and negotiation advice that caters to diverse personal contexts. It's not only a conduit for improving professional negotiation skills, but also aids in personal relationships, as attested by a participant who claims that Chris's advice helped save his marriage. In conclusion, Chris reaffirms the transformative power of communication and rapport building, whether it's in high-stakes hostage negotiations or everyday interpersonal relationships. Through his ongoing Fireside sessions, he continues to help people improve their communication skills and enhance their relationships, underlining that the mastery of negotiation stems from understanding human psychology and being adept at navigating it. Dr. Huberman and Chris Voss have an insightful discussion around the concept of the phrase, sounds like. According to Dr. Huberman, this phrase could be an immensely powerful tool, not just for negotiations, but for transforming the way people interact with one another. Equipped with this phrase, individuals implicitly offer a hypothesis of what they've heard, thereby enhancing their listening skills. Dr. Huberman, thus, truly wishes the adoption of this phrase from an early age to nurture a generation of good listeners. Transitioning from the discussion of linguistic tools, Dr. Huberman thanks Chris for joining him and appreciates his contribution to the world of knowledge. He praises Chris's relentless efforts in disseminating his wisdom through various platforms and mediums, which he has gleaned from experiences in high-intensity environments. The aim always has been for the audience to extract significant value for their daily life, which hopefully is devoid of any hostile negotiations. Chris, on his part, confirms reciprocated admiration for Dr. Huberman's mission of getting actionable tools out into the world to help people to navigate their lives more effectively. He expresses his gratitude for the privilege to have been interviewed on Dr. Huberman's podcast, which he has found valuable since he first discovered it. Dr. Huberman, concluding the conversation with Chris Voss, motivates his audience not just to learn from the podcast, but also engage with it. He encourages them to subscribe to the YouTube channel, leave a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple, and post questions or comments while also checking the sponsors that support the podcast. He also reminds them about the partnership with Momentous Supplements for high-quality single-ingredient formations for sleep, hormone support, and focus. Huberman closes this portion of the conversation by encouraging subscriptions to their zero-cost neural network newsletter that offers podcast summaries and toolkits related to sleep, learning, plasticity, and dopamine regulation. He ends by expressing gratitude to Chris Voss for the engaging and enriching conversation and to the listeners for their enthusiastic interest in science. While this conversation wraps up, the exploration of Chris Voss's knowledge and the world of hostage negotiation continues. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of The Pod Slice.